Welcome to Engaging and Empowering School Libraries, a podcast that aims to raise the profile of school libraries by talking about topics that are current across education and teaching. Today, Darryl and I are continuing our monthly chat, FOSIL, Education and School Libraries. We hope to help you engage with the content on the FOSIL Group website, introduce you to people who are using FOSIL in schools, and most of all, just have a conversation about the role of the school librarians within education. So thanks for joining me again, Darryl. I hope you're well.
Yes, thanks. Same to you.
Yeah. From my new place in York, just so anybody doesn't know, I've now relocated. I'm permanently in the UK, which is exciting but exhausting. Anyway, so last time we talked, Darryl, it was about how the school librarian's role has changed over the years, with some schools now not even having a school library, never mind a qualified school librarian. We discussed the importance of changing the conversation and being responsible for school libraries of the future. However, we briefly mentioned the history of school libraries, and this is where we wanted to return to today. So, Darryl, if we're going to go back in history, where are we going to start today?
So, as usual, we've got a big topic and an important topic.
Absolutely.
So, just in preparation for today's meeting, I think it looks like we'll need to discuss this topic over two sessions.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because there is this real sense of history being the consequence of ideas. So ideas have consequences that play themselves out. And I think it's actually very difficult to fully understand where we are and what kinds of things we need to do. So what kind of ideas about the school library we need to have. We have touched on some of those. In order for our future history to be different.
Yeah.
So I think if we approach this over two sessions, and I'll outline that in a couple of minutes, but so in the spirit of history being the consequence of ideas, we are talking more broadly about FOSIL school libraries in education. So over the Easter holiday, there've been a couple of interesting developments, which, if it's okay with you, I'll just share, because some of them tie more or less directly into what we're going to be talking about today.
Okay.
So the first one is that I was approached by the editor of Synergy, which is the professional journal of the School Library Association of Victoria in Australia. And I was really quite excited about writing that article because there was no, because the journal is only online, there was no word count.
Okay.
And as you know, over the last couple of sessions, we've been talking quite a lot about philosophy of education.
Yeah.
Philosophy of school librarianship. So this article was an opportunity. It was an invitation to write about FOSIL, but it gave me an opportunity to more fully develop the philosophy of school librarianship in relation to education and philosophy of education.
Okay.
But then also to discuss FOSIL as an outworking of that philosophy, and then to end with a very practical consideration of FOSIL. So that article ended up being 10,500.
Wow. Almost a book.
Well, so that's the second development. So that article pretty much took care of the Easter holiday.
I'm sure. Yeah.
But I'm very, very pleased with that, and I have submitted it. I have submitted it now. So I'm just waiting for feedback about that article.
Yeah.
But the reason why I took as long as I did to write the article is because Barbara and I have been invited to submit a proposal for a book on inquiry
Yeah,
by Bloomsbury Libraries Unlimited.
fantastic.
So Barbara and I have been talking about the content of that book and sketching out the content of that book. So the article provided me with an opportunity to really think through and begin to develop more fully my specific contribution to the book.
Yeah,
So there's some really, really interesting stuff that Barbara and I are working on in relation to that book. So we are hoping over the next couple of weeks to finish the proposal and to get the proposal back to Libraries Unlimited. So I'll keep you posted on that. But
that's
the
great.
reason why I mentioned those two things is because in looking back on the history of school libraries, and I have focused for our talk today a little bit more closely on the history of school libraries in the UK.
Yeah,
Although in the article that I wrote, I learned some very interesting lessons about school librarianship in America and Canada. But the similarities are striking.
yeah.
And
Okay.
the last thing, well, the last two things are a little bit more practical. Is I also, so we've reached an interesting point now in our year 9 signature work inquiry. So the reason why the year 9 signature work inquiry is important is that that is an opportunity for me to really think through what we're doing and to keep refining what we're doing
Yeah,
as our understanding of what it is that we're trying to do grows.
absolutely. Yeah, just jump in as a reminder for anybody listening. Signature work is a project that Darryl does within Blanchland. But the reason it's called signature work, if I've got this right, is because the students need to be proud enough of their work to put their own signature to it. Is that a good enough explanation of why it's called signature work?
It's close.
Okay.
So a signature work is an inquiry-based exploration of a significant issue, problem, or question
Okay.
that students decide on and define for themselves. And it involves substantial reflection and expression. So both through writing, but also through speaking.
Right.
And when we started at Blanchland, our short-term goal was to establish a signature work inquiry, which by its very nature is interdisciplinary. It draws meaningfully on work in more than one subject.
Yeah.
So our goal was to establish a signature work inquiry in each phase of the school, partly so that we could benchmark the priority skills. So the FOSIL priority skills in transition years. So year 2, year 6, year 9, and then going into year 12. So to link those signature works to the priority skills in those transition years so that we can be more certain that we are systematically and progressively developing those priority skills as students progress through the school.
Okay. Thank you.
And I am Jenny is largely responsible for the year 6 signature work inquiry and the year 12. And I am largely responsible for the year 9 signature work inquiry. So the year 9 signature work inquiry is really important because that is where we are able to, where it's possible for me to most purposefully develop the theory into practice.
Yeah.
So there's a major development in relation to that, given where we are in the year 9 signature work. And
Right.
that relates to using the writing of an essay, not as a way to assess learning,
Yeah.
but as a way to learn. So writing as a tool to develop knowledge and understanding. So I've been working on something on that, and I'm very excited about it. And I'm hoping over the next, over the course of this week, to be able to share that in the forum. So there's some really, really interesting and important practical developments relating to FOSIL that I should be able to share in the near future.
So bringing that back to, so this is based on the fact that you've begun, because of the history in the article that you've just written, it is links to what you've been doing within those sessions.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Because yes, and then so what I'm beginning to appreciate is how all of this stuff ties together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the work on so I'm creating a graphic organizer to both teach and assess the development of an essay as a way to help students think about what they're doing and to begin to be able to share what they are doing in a meaningful and coherent way.
Okay.
But that links to the last development, which I was just going to say, is that we recently developed an academic integrity policy.
Okay.
And the academic integrity policy obviously needs to refer to the skills, and many of those skills are technology dependent, which immediately brings AI into the picture.
Yeah.
And one of the things that is really interesting, which I argued in the article, but also now am addressing practically in the year 9 signature work, is how practically we address the problem of technology facilitating cheating.
Yeah.
And that if we're wanting to deal with that effectively, the only way that we can do with that is to find opportunities to work with children and to help them to develop their own ideas.
Yeah.
And to be able to share those ideas in a ethical way.
Absolutely. So getting children excited about their own learning as opposed to
Exactly.
finding quick ways to find the answer. Yeah.
Yes, and then trying to deal with the problem of cheating rather than the more challenging but infinitely more important problem of engaging students in the learning process and helping them to think for themselves and to be able to share what they are learning from other people's stuff in an academically honest way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So all of that stuff is tied together. And actually, you will see that when we start looking at the history, those issues have been present right from the very beginning, and those issues still confront us today.
Exactly.
So this is a real opportunity to begin to think about how we address these problems practically and effectively.
Absolutely. Okay, so where are we starting then, Darryl? What
Uh,
are you taking us back to?
so what I've done in writing the article, I was reminded of a short article that I'd read quite a while ago by Norman Bezic. So Norman, I've really struggled a little bit to piece together a picture of Norman Bezic's life. But but he is absolutely extraordinary. So I think if you were to ask me who maybe the top 5 writers or thinkers about librarianship, and specifically school librarianship, are the most influential, in my opinion, he would easily be in the top 5. And he is significant to me for 2 reasons, because I first came across him when he was writing about the library college movement in America in the 1970s. But he was from England, and as far as I understand it, he ended his career as the librarian at the Institute of Education in London.
Okay.
But he was heavily involved with school librarianship in the UK, and his insights are absolutely astonishing. But the article that he wrote, which was published in 1986, so what I'm going to propose is that for this first session, we look at the bits and pieces of UK school librarianship that I've been able to pull together up to 1986, which is when he wrote the article. And then next time, to reflect on developments since 1986 from where we are today, with the view to where we go from here.
Yeah, sounds good.
So the reason why that article is particularly interesting is because it's called The Pastor's Prologue, 2 decades of missed chances.
Okay.
Okay, so those 2 decades effectively take us to 1970, which for him was a very important and very exciting period.
Okay.
So in fact, he says 1970 is special because it promised the dawn of a great new age of school librarianship.
Okay.
1970. So just before that, in 1937, so 1937.
That's a big jump, Darryl.
Well, so to get us to 1970, he just goes back to 1937, which saw the formation of the School Library Association.
Okay.
The School Library Association is formed in 1937 and campaigned vigorously for a role for school libraries in post-war reconstruction.
Right.
So then also just to mention there that SILIP School Libraries Group was formed in 1979, although, so that was as a special interest group. But one of the interesting things, which I don't think we'll have time to talk about now, is I've got a little booklet called the School Library Association Personal Survey of 50 Years. And I think one thing just worth mentioning in passing is that in the years leading up to 1937, there were enough school librarians with an interest in school librarianship for the formation of an association to become possible.
Yeah.
However, and I'd need to look into it a little bit further, but it seems that at the at the founding of the SLA, there was division, so an unexpected division, and a group of school librarians argued that the new association should be part of the Library Association, which eventually became SILIP.
Okay, so the Library Association already existed. And
Yes.
the School Library Association wanted to set up on their own.
Well, so school librarians wanted an association.
Okay.
So actually at the meeting,
Oh, okay.
who found the School Library Association, a group of librarians within that group unexpectedly argued that that new association should be part of the Library Association.
Okay. So
Um,
that's where the division came from, right at the beginning.
so there was a so there was this split right from the outset.
Yeah. So
Um,
obviously it doesn't matter now, it is what it is, but I can see why they would want something within. So in the Library Association initially, was there other special interest groups at that point? Was there health like there is now and law and that kind of thing, or had that not already started within the Library Association?
so I would imagine, so that bit of the history I still need to look at
Yeah.
further.
Okay.
But I think that the fact that it took until 1979 for the school librarians within the Library Association to form a special interest group. I'm
Mm,
not sure that the special interest groups, as we know them today, existed in 1937, but I would be surprised if the Library Association didn't have or didn't represent librarians from different professions.
okay. Yeah, yeah. Well, it would make sense that it did, wouldn't it?
Yeah. But I think so the thing that is significant is that there was a desire among school librarians to form an association, and at the at the meeting to form the School Library Association, unexpectedly, a group of librarians argued that that association should be part of the Library Association, but that ran counter to the majority of the librarians who had been intending to establish an association for school librarians. So that split then eventually leads in 1979 to the formation of the School Libraries group within SILIB.
Yeah.
Although there must have been enough of a specialist interest in school librarianship within SILIB to warrant the creation of SLG in 1979.
Well, okay. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I think there is more work to be done there. But the School Library Association campaigns vigorously for a role for school libraries in the post-war reconstruction. And a significant achievement from those efforts is that in the years immediately after the war, all new school library buildings requiring official approval were required to have a room designated as a library, although there was no specification about what needed to go, what should go on in that room.
Right.
All new schools that were officially approved had a room designated as a library, but without any guidance about what went on in that room.
Okay.
So the tragedy. So in terms of ideas having consequences,
Yeah.
what Norman Beswick said is that when asked what should go on in that room,
Right.
he says official pronouncements and the overwhelming emphasis in the school librarian, so the journal of the School Library Association, focused on recreational reading,
Right.
particularly children's fiction, rather than classroom-related activities.
Yeah.
So
Even back then.
yeah, so that's immediately after the war. All new schools requiring official approval, state schools requiring official approval, have to have a room called a library. When asked what should go on in those rooms, the association So not exclusively, but the overwhelming emphasis, according to Norman Beswick, is on recreational reading.
Oh, okay.
So he says that recreational reading is hugely important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the value and significance of recreational reading in a school library only really comes into clear focus once you have fully explored best practice and use of the library to the role of the library in teaching and learning. So it's only once we fully understand and have achieved the potential of the library in relation to teaching and learning that the real value and significance of the library's role in recreational reading becomes clear.
Yeah.
So he says that so librarians concentrating on out of school reading. Now, what I think he means by that is reading that isn't related to what children are studying.
Okay, so it's the fictional reading.
Yes. So the recreational reading. So concentrating on out of school reading created a disconnect with classroom teachers who came to view the library as marginal to their interests, and the perception that recreational reading, and the perception, further the perception that recreational reading could be supported from bookshops and public libraries outside of school, marginalized the library even further when allocating budgets.
Yeah, well, you can see why that would happen. That's what's happening today, isn't it? It's the fact that it's reading for pleasure, not connected to the curriculum. It's nice to have, it's not essential.
Yeah, so I think that the two issues there are, one, the focus on recreational reading creates a disconnect with classroom teachers.
Yeah.
So classroom teachers view the library as marginal to their interests.
Yeah.
And that is compounded, it's aggravated by the fact that there is a perception that recreational reading can be served, the recreational needs of students. Now, whether that is actually the case or not is a secondary issue. The perception that it can be met outside of the library has massive budgetary implications.
Yeah, of course it does. Yeah.
So that is the situation from immediately after the war. So that's how we start after the war.
Yeah.
So he says, so this began to change in the 1960s. Now, so in the 1960s, I think there were, not just in the UK, but around the world, was marked by educational reform. So I think that's where this sense of progressive education as opposed to traditional education first comes into the picture. So it's this educational reform in the 1960s where you then have these efforts at what came to be known as progressive education. So that is a lot of curricular reform. So interestingly,
Yeah, so it was all part of, so you can see, so if we're thinking that this started in the 1960s, you can see where SLG began to come into its own in 1979, because that was working towards that. There was a more of an educational purpose for the school library. Do you think the two are connected?
So it's entirely possible, because so I think the two things that struck me here as being interesting is that in this period in the 1960s with this educational reform, and I think it is also maybe just worth mentioning now, is that even today, for example, on Edu Twitter,
Yeah.
is this division, this really, I think, artificial division and hostility between traditional and progressive approaches to education.
So let's iron this out. So traditional, what is the difference between the two? Explain it for me in simple terms.
He talks about it as let me just check here. He calls it a good bit of straight teaching. Didactic transmission teaching,
and
supplemented by exercises.
Okay, so that is which one?
Traditional.
Traditional. So traditional is what we mean as teaching to the test, then effectively teaching them what they need to know in order to be able to answer some questions on it.
Yes. So I think what we've got to do, because this is absolutely critical, I think, for understanding where we are and where we go from here.
Yeah.
So it is worth just coming back to this again and again and again. So
Yeah.
I think yeah, it's not.
Sorry, let me just say, so traditional teaching came from the fact that that's how it was always done.
Yes. So that is the stereotypical, the teacher standing in front, talking to the students, students making notes,
yes,
memorizing what they need to learn, and then doing a test on it.
Yeah, so when children first went to school, when schools first started, that was the setup. That was what was expected. That's what was the norm, as it were.
Yes. So so we just need to be clear as we go forward that those are stereotypes.
Yes.
And it's not as simple on this side, and it's not as simple on the progressive side, because progressive.
Yeah. So what does progressive look like then?
So then progressive is a greater focus on the student, wanting to give the student greater responsibility and freedom for their learning, the student being more active and independent in their learning, and the teacher playing less of a didactic role and more of a support
And facilitator, I suppose.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there were many bad practices that came with. So that's where the FOFO.
Bad practices came with the traditional, in as much as it was a go and find out for yourself. It's putting it
No. With the traditional, traditional, there was no scope for the student to go and find out for themselves.
No, so yeah, but in the progressive, it feels like if I'm looking back at it, that the reason that the progressive hasn't just caught on and everybody wants to do it is because it might have not been done as well as it should have been done.
Precisely.
And actually what it led to, if I'm understanding this right, was students not even being taught the skills of how to find out for themselves, and actually just randomly and as the internet progressed, that probably got even worse, because and this, I suppose at the beginning, find out for yourself was at least you might have had a book in front of you and you had to read it. as the internet progressed, then it was type the question in and look, you've got the answer. So,
Yeah.
so that's where the progressive fell down.
Yes.
And why the two sides maybe don't always meet.
Yes. So it's exactly that, because Norman Beswick mentions inquiry in relation to this progressive reform of education. But we have elsewhere, we've spoken about the four debilitating tendencies that rob inquiry of its
Potency.
educational potency.
Yeah.
And so right at the beginning, you can see where without a deep understanding of what inquiry is and the process of inquiry and what it takes to support inquiry, you then find children. So that's where those that stereotypical image of just allowing the child to decide what the child wants to learn, without any guidance or input or from the teacher, and they've got completely free choice. They don't learn anything important. They don't learn anything meaningful. They don't learn anything. It's a waste of time.
Yeah. See. Yeah.
But at exactly the same time, there was good learning that took place in some good learning that took place in the traditional approach, and there was some very, very good learning that took place in the progressive.
Yeah.
But the important thing is that that in that in that environment, that atmosphere of wanting to develop students as independent learners, for them to become more active in their own learning, teachers began to reconsider the value of the library.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay. So at that point, when was this? About early 1970s?
going into the 1960s.
Okay,
So during the 1960s, there is this.
There was a transformation then of these progressive teachers, those that understood the value of actually teaching research skills, I suppose, that the importance of school libraries then became apparent to those individuals. Is that what we're saying?
Or at least those teachers began to imagine different possibilities
Okay.
for possibilities for teaching and learning. So yeah, possibilities for the role of the library in teaching and learning rather than just recreational reading.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So that changed in the early 1960s then. That's interesting.
Yes. So through the 1960s, we've got this. But I think, again, it's important that I think this shift in emphasis on the school library comes from outside the school library, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it's educational reform.
All right. Okay.
Teachers who are viewing what they're doing differently,
Yeah.
and who are looking for ways to support what they're doing more effectively. So they begin to imagine different possibilities for the school library.
Okay.
So then he says that so what is important here is that a lot of the the thinking about, so the rethinking of school libraries, the reimagining of school libraries, was informed and encouraged by developments in America.
Right.
So that's why anything that we learn about the history of school libraries in America is useful and relevant to the history of school libraries in the UK. And
So
it was
so did something particularly happen in America to make that change for them?
yes.
Okay.
Well, yes, it was educational reform, so progressive
Yes.
educational reform.
Okay, but
Now,
were they ahead of us at that point? Or was it about the same time?
ahead.
Because they went down the route of teacher librarian, whereas the UK didn't ever. Is that
Well,
the
you
time
see,
that that happened?
well, no, you see, interestingly, one of the things that Norman Beswick comes onto that made 1970 so special was that the possibility of full qualification as both teacher and librarian seemed to be a distinct possibility,
Okay, wow. But it never happened.
but it never happened.
Do we know why?
Yeah, well, so yeah, we'll come on to that. We'll come on to that. But so
Keep
I think
listening, folks. There's more to come.
so. At some point, it would be worth having a look at developments in education
Yeah, yeah,
in America that led to a rethinking of the school library in America and ideas about the school library that they acted on differently. So those same ideas had different consequences
yeah.
in America than they did here. So we need to understand that. But so again, all of the stuff that we've said that I've said about Neil Postman, for example, that teaching as a subversive activity, where it devotes a whole chapter to inquiry. That was first published in 1969. So that really gives us a picture of where those developments had led by the end of the 1960s, which brings us to 1970.
Yeah.
So by 1970, apparently, so I see if I can find this still, but in 1970, the School Library Association produced the first set of library standards.
Right.
And in those standards, school libraries were relabeled school library resource centers.
Okay. And
The first time
Fantastic.
in 1970. Now, I think the interesting thing there is that I had viewed that term negatively,
Mm,
because when I first became a school librarian in 2003, the school that employed me had a library, but the school that I went to from there had a school library resource center.
right.
And it was very interesting that basically that term had come to mean a place where the resources are kept.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is what a library, which is what we know is a library.
But what I hadn't appreciated is that was at that time that was actually a positive development,
Mm,
because teachers many teachers were increasingly interested in resource-based learning,
right. Okay.
which is research, which more broadly is inquiry.
Yeah.
So it's the role of the library in active, independent learning.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was actually reflected a positive development. So then the other thing, so we're now at 1970. So just to remind you that this book, Libraries in Secondary Schools, that's the one that we've spoken about, with the three, which is interesting. So this book, 1972, in the light of what we've spoken about, the three main purposes of the library: inquiry, study, recreational reading, in that order.
Yeah.
So that is quite a different emphasis from what Norman Beswick said the emphasis was in the school librarian following the war, where the overwhelming emphasis was only on recreational reading. So
Librarians in Secondary Schools was published by who?
the School Library Association.
Okay. Yeah.
So that represents a massive shift.
Yeah.
From.
So we should have been, from that point,
Yes,
heading in a great trajectory to having school libraries that were resource centers, information support.
So remember, he starts the article by saying 1970 was special because it promised the dawn of a great new age.
Yeah, and you can see why.
Librarianship.
Yeah.
However,
Yeah, that didn't happen, did it?
So 2 decades of mischances.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing we need to bring us from 1970 to 1986 quite swiftly.
Yeah.
So just to give some kind of a sense of what was happening through the 1970s. So there was an increase in number of chartered librarians in schools. There was a much greater connection between school librarianship and education. So there was a much closer connection between the school library and the classroom, school librarian teacher, school librarianship, education. And then he says some schools of librarianship were developing an at least notional link with schools and departments of education, and for a brief while, the possibilities of getting a full double qualification in librarianship and teaching seemed to be increasing.
So that was in the 70s.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. So through the 70s, that was happening. And then he says all of this development had its parallel. So all of what was happening here had its parallel sometimes a decade or so earlier in other parts of the more prosperous countries in the English-speaking world.
Okay, that's interesting because that should have meant that teacher librarianship should have come in, because it had already been done and demonstrated as something that was good.
Yeah. So
but something changed. Yeah.
Yes.
For some reason, the UK didn't go down that route. Do we know why?
So that I think requires a little bit more investigation. Some of the things will come out. We've got 2 more points really to cover that begin to give us a sense of why that didn't happen.
Okay.
So by the end of the decade, so by the end of the 1970s, he says the groundswell of support for the school library cause was already receding. And I don't know enough of the history of that time, but he does spend quite a bit of time talking about cuts to the education system. And he said nobody wants to downplay how savage those cuts were to the education system as a whole.
Yeah.
But he does say that school libraries suffered more than their fair share in those cuts.
Okay.
But the crucial thing is, he says that the present situation cannot be blamed. So however bad those cuts were, the reversal of our fortune by the end of 1970 can't be blamed on the cuts alone. So this is the last point before we position stuff just for the next session. Is he says most teachers believe in a rather general way that school libraries are good things.
Yeah.
It is rarer to find them placed higher in priority than the teacher's own individual needs, or recognized as relating to those needs.
Yeah.
So somehow, by the end of the 1970s, we've gone all the way back to teachers perceiving the library to be marginal to their interests. And then he ends, so he ends this section by saying, the implication suggests itself that for far too long, the school library campaign has concentrated on pressing for financial provision, whereas the real problem is to influence what teachers do and feel they should do.
Oh, okay, that's an interesting one, because you can't do anything without the financial support.
Yes, but where, yeah. So I think what he is highlighting, which he then goes on to develop in the rest of the through the rest of the paper, because this is where this first campaign for school libraries that peaked in the early 70s, where this first campaign fails. So
But interestingly, that's the same place as the SILIP SLG starts. So they started, so they must have felt that it was now their turn to raise the mantle and start running.
So it would be interesting to, yeah. So that would be an interesting further investigation, is the circumstances that led directly to the formation of SLG. They celebrated 40 years. There was a commemorative 40-year School Libraries in View that they published. I think it was, well, it would have been 2019. I think it may have come out in 2020, but I think 2019 was the 40-year celebration. So I haven't had time to dig too much into that.
I think I think what I found interesting with this conversation is that historically, then, school libraries and librarians at the birth of school libraries in the UK were focused on reading for pleasure. And it seems to be, from what if I'm hearing you right, it seems to be education and teachers and reform within education that has supported the need for school librarians to do something differently. And actually, if we look at school libraries that way, we should be there to support the educational journey of our students. And that's why educators and teachers would be interested in school libraries being effective. But if we sit in our bubble of we are only reading for pleasure, that is our downfall. Is that a
Well,
reasonable summary?
yes. So you see, which is why I thought, um, this would be a good place to stop, because
Yeah.
what it says is that, even though this campaign for school libraries effectively failed,
Yeah.
even in 1986, when he was writing the article, he was saying that it's not completely hopeless, and he gives some reasons to be hopeful.
Okay.
One of which I said would link to developments relating to FOSIL outside of this talk. One of which was the introduction of microcomputers into schools in the 1980s.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
at around the time that he was writing this, there were reasons why the introduction of computers into schools could have been a positive thing. So he gives,
That's for
yes.
next time.
So he gives reasons to be hopeful.
Good.
But I think but
No, don't leave it on a but, leave it on a hopeful.
well, it is hopeful,
Good.
because I think we can learn from, because what would that be? 86, 96, 2006, 2016, 2026. I think we can be hopeful to learn from 40 years, a further 40 years of mischances.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think there are some ways in which so in terms of what he talks about, both as reason for hope, but also as cause for alarm, I think in many ways we do today still have reasons for hope, but some of those things that I think he presents as positive have become mischances for us. And in some ways, I think we may be in a weaker position today than we were in 1986. But equally, there are reasons to be hopeful that we can change the course of future history.
Right, I'm going to stop because we've hit a positive. So I'm really, really looking forward to talking to you next month about 1986 onwards. We do hope, Darryl and I hope that you've enjoyed listening to our FOSIL podcast. As always, if you'd like to comment on anything you've heard, we'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss out on future discussions. Thank you very much for listening.